What if the greatest discoveries of ancient civilizations weren't locked away in crumbling ruins or buried beneath layers of dust, but instead whispered from one generation to the next? Picture this: thousands of years of wisdom, not written down, but carried forward through stories told around campfires, chants sung in sacred ceremonies, and rituals performed under starlit skies. This isn't just speculation, it's a reality that challenges everything we think we know about how knowledge survives the test of time. Across the globe, from the indigenous tribes of the Amazon to the remote villages of the Himalayas, oral traditions have acted as living libraries, preserving intricate details about medicine, astronomy, and even forgotten histories with astonishing accuracy. But here's the question that haunts historians and anthropologists alike. Could these oral traditions hold fragments of ancient knowledge so advanced, so precise, that they rival what we've uncovered in written records? Think about the stories your grandparents told you, the ones passed down through your family, changing slightly with each retelling but keeping the core alive. Now imagine that process stretching back not just decades but millennia. Indigenous cultures have mastered this art, embedding critical information within myths, songs, and even dance. For example, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia have oral traditions that describe geographical features and celestial events dating back over 40,000 years, details later confirmed by modern science. How is that possible? Because these stories weren't just entertainment, they were carefully crafted vessels for survival, designed to encode knowledge in ways that could outlast empires. And it raises a thrilling possibility: what if other ancient cultures did the same? What if the key to unlocking lost technologies or forgotten sciences lies not in deciphering cryptic texts, but in listening to the echoes of voices long gone? This journey isn't just about uncovering facts, it's about redefining how we understand human ingenuity. For centuries, historians prioritized written records as the gold standard of truth, often dismissing oral traditions as unreliable or mythical. But what if that bias has blinded us to a deeper, richer tapestry of knowledge? Recent studies in neuroscience reveal something extraordinary. The human brain is wired to remember information better when it's tied to rhythm, melody, or narrative. That's why ancient cultures embedded their wisdom in songs and stories. They weren't just preserving the past, they were engineering the future. So as we explore these threads of oral history, we're not just piecing together fragments of the past, we're rediscovering a lost art of knowledge keeping, one that might hold answers to questions we've yet to even ask. Ready to listen closer? The past is speaking, if we're willing to hear it. Consider the Iliad and the Odyssey, epic poems attributed to Homer, memorized and recited for centuries before ever being written down. These weren't just tales of war and adventure, they were repositories of Greek history, navigation techniques, and even moral codes, passed down with startling precision through generations of storytellers. What makes oral traditions so resilient isn't just repetition, it's structure. Cultures worldwide developed intricate techniques to safeguard their knowledge. The Maori of New Zealand, for instance, used rhythmic chants and genealogical recitations called whakapapa, where even a single mispronounced syllable could alert listeners to an error. Similarly, West African Griots, master oral historians trained for decades, weaving historical events, medicinal recipes, and legal precedents into songs so complex that forgetting a verse wasn't just a mistake, it was a cultural emergency. But here's where it gets fascinating. Modern research shows these methods weren't just effective, they were scientifically sophisticated. A study published in the journal Nature Human Behavior analyzed Aboriginal Australian songs describing sea level changes from over 7,000 years ago, details that matched geological records with eerie accuracy. How? Because oral traditions often encode information in layers. A single story might contain surface-level lessons for children, deeper ethical teachings for adults, and hidden technical knowledge for specialists. Take the Norse sagas. Beneath the dragons and feuds, scholars found descriptions of volcanic eruptions and climate patterns that helped reconstruct environmental history. This isn't mere folklore, it's data compression, ancient style. Yet skeptics still ask, can we trust stories that shift with each telling? The answer lies in the difference between flexibility and corruption. Oral traditions aren't photocopies, they're adaptive systems. Think of them like rivers constantly reshaping their banks, but always flowing from the same source. When the Kalahari Bushmen recount hunting strategies passed down for 12,000 years, the core principles remain intact, even as details evolve to suit new environments. That's not distortion, it's proof of a living, breathing system designed to preserve what matters most. The real question isn't whether oral traditions are reliable, it's whether we've been listening closely enough to decode their genius. The Vedas of India stand as one of the most astonishing examples of oral preservation in human history. These ancient sacred texts, composed over 3,000 years ago, were not written down for millennia. Instead, they were passed from teacher to student in an unbroken chain of memory, recited with such precision that even a single misplaced syllable was considered a grave error. How did they achieve this near-perfect transmission? Through a system of intricate techniques that turned human minds into living hard drives. Priests known as Brahmin memorized the hymns in multiple layers, word for word, backward, even in alternating patterns, embedding the text so deeply that they became inseparable from the rhythm of breath and speech. This wasn't just rote memorization, it was a sophisticated intellectual discipline, honed over generations to protect knowledge from the distortions of time. But the Vedas aren't just a testament to human memory, they're a window into a broader truth. If sacred verses could survive centuries without a single written word, what else might have been preserved through similar methods? The Vedas contain more than prayers. They hold detailed astronomical observations, mathematical concepts, and even early medical knowledge. For instance, the Rigveda describes the motions of the sun and moon with striking accuracy, while later Vedic texts outline surgical procedures using precise terminology. This raises a provocative thought. If spiritual wisdom could be safeguarded so meticulously, why not practical or scientific knowledge? Indigenous cultures worldwide have long used oral traditions to encode everything from navigation routes to herbal remedies. So why assume ancient civilizations didn't do the same? What makes the Vedic tradition especially compelling is the sheer scale of its ambition. The entire corpus spans over 100,000 verses, equivalent to memorizing 10 copies of the Iliad flawlessly. To achieve this, Vedic scholars developed a form of mental architecture, structuring hymns into melodic meters and phonetic patterns that acted as error-checking mechanisms. Imagine a song so familiar that humming the wrong note immediately feels jarring. That's how these guardians of knowledge detected mistakes. Modern researchers have even compared recitations by priests separated by centuries and found near-identical results, proving that oral transmission could rival written records in accuracy. Yet the Vedas also challenge a common assumption, that oral traditions are inherently fragile. Critics often argue that stories change with each retelling, but the Vedic model shows that with the right safeguards, oral knowledge can be as stable as ink on parchment. The key lies in cultural prioritization. When a society treats preservation as sacred, it invests extraordinary effort into maintaining fidelity. This wasn't passive storytelling. It was an active, disciplined process akin to a sacred trust. And it forces us to reconsider other ancient traditions dismissed as myth. Could the epic tales of Mesopotamia or the creation chants of the Maya also contain encoded truths, waiting to be unpacked with the right keys? The Vedas suggest that the line between myth and history might be far thinner than we've been taught. Perhaps the most profound lesson here isn't about the past, but about the future. In an age where digital storage feels permanent, the Vedas remind us that human minds, trained and dedicated, can outperform even the most advanced technology. They challenge us to rethink what we've lost in our reliance on writing, the visceral, communal act of passing knowledge voice to voice, carrying not just information but the weight of lived experience. As we uncover more about these oral vaults of wisdom, one thing becomes clear: the ancients didn't just remember their history, they sang it into eternity. Across the vast deserts of Australia, where the horizon stretches endlessly and landmarks blur into the sameness of the outback, Aboriginal peoples didn't just survive, they thrived, guided by an ancient GPS system etched not in stone or parchment, but in song. These songlines, intricate oral maps woven into melodies, encoded directions to water sources, sacred sites, and seasonal food supplies, all passed down through generations with unerring precision. But what's truly remarkable isn't just their accuracy, it's their durability. For over 60,000 years, these songs have outlasted empires, climate shifts, and colonization, proving that oral traditions aren't just about remembering, they're about enduring. Take the Yanyuwa people of northern Australia, whose songlines describe coastal landscapes that vanished beneath rising seas 7,000 years ago. Modern geologists, using sonar and sediment cores, later confirmed these submerged features, details preserved not in books, but in the rising and falling notes of a melody. This isn't coincidence, it's a testament to how deeply knowledge was embedded in cultural practice. Every rhythm, every pause served as a mnemonic device, turning survival skills into something sacred. And it wasn't just navigation. Medicinal knowledge, like the use of kangaroo apple for infections or tea tree oil for wounds, was woven into stories where plants became characters, their uses disguised as plot points. The message was clear: to lose the story wasn't just to forget a tale, it was to risk losing the cure. But the brilliance of these systems goes beyond mere utility. Indigenous cultures understood something modern science is only now grasping: that information tied to emotion, rhythm, or ritual is far harder to forget. The Inuit of the Arctic, for example, passed down intricate ice navigation techniques through throat-singing duets, where the haunting harmonies mirrored the crackling sounds of safe versus unstable ice. The Cherokee encoded agricultural wisdom in planting chants, their syllables timed to the lunar cycles they described. These weren't just memory aids, they were living algorithms, fine-tuned over centuries to prioritize what mattered most. What's striking is how these methods parallel modern data storage. Just as a computer breaks files into chunks with error-checking codes, oral traditions fragmented knowledge across multiple stories, songs, and even dances, creating redundancy. If one thread faded, others remained. The Maori's Wakapapa genealogies, for instance, wove family lineages into chants so tightly structured that skipping a generation would disrupt the entire rhythm, a built-in error detector. Similarly, the Navajo's oral histories embedded astronomical events into creation narratives, ensuring that celestial patterns critical for planting and harvest were never lost. Yet the most provocative question remains: if oral traditions could preserve survival skills so effectively, what else might they have safeguarded? The Dogon people of Mali, for instance, recount detailed astronomical knowledge about Sirius B, a star invisible to the naked eye centuries before telescopes confirmed its existence. The Haida of the Pacific Northwest describe geological events like earthquakes and tsunamis with timelines that match modern seismic records. These aren't just stories, they're time capsules, hinting at layers of understanding we're only beginning to decode. Perhaps the real lesson here is about respect for ways of knowing that don't fit neatly into textbooks or databases. When Western explorers first encountered indigenous navigation techniques, they often dismissed them as primitive, only to later realize their sophistication. Today, as climatologists study Inuit ice terminologies or botanists analyze Amazonian plant classifications passed down orally, the pattern is clear. These traditions aren't relics of the past. They're masterclasses in resilience, proving that the human voice, when harnessed with intention, can carry knowledge across millennia. And that raises a humbling thought. How much wisdom have we overlooked because we didn't think to listen? Myths have always been more than just stories. They're intricate puzzles, hiding layers of meaning beneath their surface. Take the tale of Icarus, soaring too close to the sun with wings of wax and feathers. For centuries, it's been dismissed as a simple cautionary fable about hubris. But what if it's something far more profound? Some scholars suggest the story could be a distant echo of humanity's earliest experiments with flight, perhaps even referencing real attempts using rudimentary gliders or winged contraptions. The details are too specific to ignore, the wax melting under heat, the feathers scattering in the wind. These aren't just poetic flourishes, they're observations that mirror the very real challenges of aerodynamics. Then there's the Dogon people of Mali, whose oral traditions describe Sirius B, a dense, invisible companion star to Sirius, centuries before telescopes revealed its existence. How could a culture without advanced instruments know about a star so faint it's undetectable to the naked eye? The Dogon didn't just name it, they detailed its elliptical orbit and even its 50-year rotational cycle, facts later confirmed by astronomers. Skeptics argue this knowledge might have been introduced by outside contact, but the Dogon's own creation myths and ceremonial rituals weave Sirius B into their cosmology in ways that feel deeply organic, not borrowed. This pattern repeats across cultures. The Norse myth of the wolf's girl chasing the sun isn't just a dramatic metaphor. It could encode ancient observations of solar eclipses, where the wolf symbolizes the moon's shadow. The Hindu epic Mahabharata describes weapons with effects eerily similar to modern descriptions of nuclear explosions, blinding flashes, mushroom clouds, and lingering radiation sickness. Coincidence, maybe, but when these stories emerge independently across continents, it's worth asking, were our ancestors preserving something they'd witnessed or perhaps even achieved? Symbolism acts as a protective shell for fragile knowledge. By embedding truths in myth, cultures ensured their survival across generations. A story about a hero battling a dragon might secretly document an encounter with now extinct megafauna or a volcanic eruption. The Aboriginal rainbow serpent, for instance, isn't just a created deity. Its movements in songlines often trace real river systems and geological formations. The serpent's anger could symbolize floods or earthquakes, warnings passed down through allegory. What's striking is how these myths resist distortion. Unlike plain instructions, which degrade over time, symbolic narratives adapt without losing their core. The Greek story of Daedalus building the labyrinth might encode ancient engineering principles, with the maze design reflecting sacred geometry or even early architectural blueprints. The fact that these details survive not as dry textbooks, but as gripping tales suggests our ancestors understood something we're only now rediscovering. Knowledge wrapped in story is knowledge that endures. So the next time you hear an old myth, listen closely. That dragon's fiery breath, it might be a volcano. Those celestial battles, perhaps a record of supernova. The past isn't just speaking to us, it's whispering in code. The Inca civilization, stretching across the Andes without a written language as we know it, left behind one of history's most intriguing puzzles, the Quipu. These intricate arrays of knotted chords, far from simple counting tools, were a sophisticated mnemonic system capable of recording everything from tax records to astronomical data. Each knot's position, color, and even the twist of its fibers held meaning, transforming strings into a three-dimensional language. Spanish chroniclers noted how Inca administrators could read a quipu and recite entire census reports or historical events, proof that what looks like primitive record-keeping was actually a precision instrument for preserving complex information. But the quipu's genius lies in its adaptability. Unlike static writing, these knots could be rearranged, updated, or even erased by untying, making them living documents that evolved with their society. Modern researchers have identified patterns suggesting some quipus-encoded mathematical concepts like Fibonacci sequences or lunar cycles, knowledge critical for agriculture and architecture. If a bundle of strings could hold such depth, it forces us to reconsider what other, pre-literate cultures might have achieved with their own systems. Half a world away, Celtic bards in ancient Ireland took memory to another level entirely. Trained from childhood in darkened chambers to sharpen their mental focus, these poets could recite epic genealogies spanning thousands of years, along with legal codes and medicinal lore, all in flawless meter. Their secret, the memory palace technique, associating information with vivid mental images placed along imagined pathways. A single bard might commit 15,000 lines of verse to memory, their training so rigorous that mistakes were punishable by satirical poems exposing their errors. This wasn't just entertainment, it was a high-stakes preservation strategy, ensuring that history and lore survived invasion and upheaval. What's startling is how these disparate cultures, Inca, Celtic, Vedic, Aboriginal, all arrived at similar solutions for safeguarding knowledge without writing. They understood that memory isn't passive, it's a muscle that thrives on structure. The Inuits' oral maps of Arctic ice flows, the Polynesians' wave navigation chants, the Jewish tradition of memorizing the Torah through melodic tropes, all reveal a universal truth. When survival depends on remembering, humans develop extraordinary methods to ensure nothing vital is lost. Perhaps the most revolutionary insight comes from modern neuroscience. Studies show that the brain processes information differently when it's tied to multisensory cues, like the quipu's tactile knots or the bard's rhythmic verses. These techniques didn't just prevent forgetfulness, they optimized recall by engaging multiple neural pathways simultaneously. The Inca accountant running their fingers along a quipu wasn't just counting, they were activating spatial, tactile, and visual memory all at once. This raises a tantalizing possibility. If oral traditions could preserve legal codes and star charts with such fidelity, why not advanced mathematics or engineering? The Maya, for instance, maintained precise calendars without writing down their calculations, while Bronze Age builders transmitted megalithic construction techniques across generations through apprentice models and chants. Maybe Stonehenge's alignments or the Nazca lines weren't just products of trial and error, but of meticulously preserved knowledge passed mouth to ear until the chain finally broke. The real wonder isn't that these techniques worked, it's that we ever doubted them. In our rush to equate progress with writing, we overlooked the elegance of systems that turned human biology itself into a storage device. The quipu's knots, the bard's verses, the songlines' melody, they weren't just alternatives to writing. They were something perhaps more durable, knowledge woven into the fabric of culture itself, where it could outlast parchment, stone, or even the rise and fall of empires. Even the strongest chains have weak links, and oral traditions are no exception. For all their remarkable resilience, these living libraries face a relentless adversary: time. With each generation that passes, whispers of the past grow fainter, details blur, and sometimes entire chapters slip through the cracks. Take the ancient Greek poet Hesiod, who lamented as early as 700 BC how stories of the gods had already become fragmented and contradictory in his day. If distortion crept in so quickly even in cultures that prized accuracy, how much more might have been lost over millennia? The risks are manifold. A single devastating event, a plague, a forced migration, the suppression of indigenous languages, can sever the thread of transmission irreparably. When European colonizers banned Native American ceremonial practices in the 19th century, entire cosmologies teetered on the brink of extinction. Stories survived, yes, but often in fragments, like a jigsaw puzzle with half its pieces missing. Even without such catastrophes, the natural evolution of language itself poses challenges. Words shift meaning over centuries. Old English's wix, once meaning wise woman, became witch, carrying entirely different connotations. When a single term alters, how many layers of original intent disappear with it? Yet some distortions aren't accidents, they're deliberate. Rulers from ancient Egypt to medieval Europe routinely rewrote origin myths to legitimize their power. The Epic of Gilgamesh exists in multiple versions across Mesopotamian cultures, each tweaked to flatter local kings. This isn't just fading memory, it's active manipulation, where knowledge becomes a tool for control rather than preservation. But here's where oral traditions reveal their cunning. Many cultures embedded safeguards against corruption. The Maori Whakapapa genealogies, for instance, weren't just recited. They were performed in ritual contexts where errors triggered immediate correction from elders. West African griots trained for decades, mastering tonal inflections that acted like checksums for historical accuracy. These weren't casual storytellers. They were disciplined archivists wearing the mask of entertainers. Modern experiments shed light on how these systems worked and where they falter. Psychologists at the University of London ran a decades-long telephone game study, passing stories orally across generations of participants. They found that while surface details mutated wildly, names changed. Locations shifted. Core survival information, like warnings about poisonous plants, remained strikingly intact. Our brains seem hardwired to prioritize what matters most, even when the delivery system is imperfect. The real test comes when oral accounts collide with physical evidence. In 2018, archaeologists excavating in northern Australia uncovered ancient tools at a site described in Aboriginal songlines, except the songs placed them there over 7,000 years earlier. When carbon dating confirmed the artifact's age, it proved that some threads of memory can stretch across epochs without snapping, yet other cases are murkier. The Icelandic sagas describe Viking voyages to North America, but details like settlement locations conflict with archaeological findings. This isn't proof of failure. It's a reminder that oral and written histories share the same flaw. They're both human, and humans see through lenses of bias and omission. Perhaps the most profound insight comes from cultures that embraced flexibility. The Cherokee don't speak of a single, correct version of their origin stories, but rather multiple tellings that reflect different communities' experiences. This fluidity isn't corruption, it's adaptation, allowing wisdom to remain relevant across changing worlds. A story that rigidly preserves obsolete details is, in a way, just as lost as one that's forgotten entirely. So does fragility undermine oral tradition's value? The answer lies in what we define as accuracy. If we demand word-for-word perfection over centuries, even written texts fail, manuscripts are copied with errors, translated with bias. But if we seek enduring truths, the warning beneath the fable, the star map hidden in the chant, the survival principle encoded in ritual, then oral traditions don't just preserve knowledge. They distill it like rainwater filtered through layers of stone, emerging clear and essential at the other end of time. Imagine a world where the Library of Alexandria never burned. Its scrolls intact, we'd hold thousands of ancient texts at our fingertips, mathematical treatises, philosophical dialogues, medical manuals, all preserved perfectly. Yet even in that alternate reality, we'd face a sobering truth. Writing isn't the invincible shield against forgetting that we assume. Clay tablets crumble. Ink fades, languages become indecipherable. The Rosetta Stone was a lucky exception. Without it, Egyptian hieroglyphs might still be unreadable. Meanwhile, in the highlands of New Guinea, elders recite genealogies stretching back 20 generations without a single written word. This paradox lies at the heart of our dilemma. Is knowledge safer etched in stone or woven into the living fabric of human memory? Consider the vulnerabilities of written records. The Maya codices, once numbering in the thousands, were nearly erased from history when Spanish bishops ordered them burned as pagan artifacts. Only 4 survived. Even when texts escape deliberate destruction, they face subtler threats. Medieval scribes copying Aristotle's works introduced errors with each transcription, some so significant they altered entire philosophical concepts. Languages evolve, leaving documents locked behind linguistic barriers. Linear B, the script of ancient Mycenae, took half a century to decipher after its discovery. And let's not forget bias. History is written by the victors, after all. The official records of empires often glorify rulers while silencing dissent, leaving us with a curated and sometimes outright fabricated version of events. Oral traditions face different challenges, but their resilience is startling. When the Taino people of the Caribbean were decimated by colonization, their written records vanished, yet their creation myths survived through oral lineages in neighboring islands, preserving cosmological knowledge modern anthropologists later verified against archaeological findings. The secret: redundancy. Indigenous cultures often distribute knowledge across multiple storytellers, rituals, and art forms. Lose one thread and others remain. The Navajo Night Chant, a 9-day ceremonial recitation, encodes medicinal knowledge, astronomical observations, and moral codes in layers so intricate that no single person holds the entire tradition. It's collectively safeguarded by the community. But here's where it gets fascinating. Oral and written systems aren't opposites, they're often collaborators. The Hindu Vedas were memorized orally for millennia before being written down, resulting in a textual tradition with virtually zero variance across manuscripts. Icelandic sagas, blending oral storytelling with written recording, preserved details like the volcanic eruption of 940 so accurately that modern geologists use them to date ash layers. Even the Bible's longevity stems from this hybrid approach. Early Christian communities both recited Gospels aloud and copied them meticulously, creating a dual-layer preservation system. The real measure of trustworthiness isn't the medium, but the method. A hastily scribbled note decays faster than a well-maintained oral tradition, just as a fragile rumor distorts quicker than a carefully inscribed stele. Ancient Sumerians recognized this, embedding checksums in their cuneiform accounting tablets. Early error detection, akin to the tonal markers West African griots used to verify historical accuracy in their recitations. Perhaps the deepest insight comes from Australian Aboriginal communities, where songlines function as both oral maps and living legal documents, their authority recognized in modern land rights cases. When an elder sings a boundary marker passed down 40,000 years, and geologists confirm it matches prehistoric coastlines, that's not just memory, it's precision engineering of knowledge. So which system wins? Neither, and both. Like two ropes twisted into a stronger cord, oral and written traditions each compensate for the other's weaknesses. The written word gives us Hammurabi's code exactly as he decreed it, but the oral tradition gives us the inflection in a Cherokee healer's voice as they describe a plant's use. One freezes knowledge in time, the other keeps it breathing. The fire that destroys a library may spare the songs around a campfire, just as the invasion that silences storytellers may leave behind sealed clay tablets waiting to be read. Our ancestors weren't choosing between speech and script, they were using every tool available to shout across the centuries. Now it's our turn to listen. The Iliad and the Odyssey stand as towering monuments of human memory, not just as literature, but as a testament to oral tradition's astonishing power to preserve truth across centuries. For generations before being committed to parchment, these epics lived in the voices of Greek bards, who recited them with such fidelity that even the smallest details, ship inventories in the Iliad, star patterns in the Odyssey, remained eerily consistent. Modern archaeologists have stumbled upon a startling realization. Homer's poetic flourishes often match real Bronze Age artifacts and locations. The description of Ajax's tower shield, once dismissed as mythical, mirrors the very same body armor found in Mycenaean graves. Nestor's golden cup, elaborately detailed in the Iliad, bears uncanny resemblance to a 16-handled vessel unearthed in Crete. These aren't just coincidences, they're fingerprints of a deeper historical layer, meticulously preserved through rhythm and repetition. But what makes Homer's epics truly extraordinary isn't just their historical nuggets, it's their structure. The poems are woven with formulaic phrases and recurring epithets like swift-footed Achilles or rosy-fingered Dawn. Scholars once assumed these were mere stylistic quirks until they realized their genius. These repetitions acted as mental anchors, allowing bards to reconstruct the narrative accurately even when improvising. Think of it like a jazz musician riffing on a familiar chord progression. The framework stays intact even as the performance evolves. This technique, known as oral formulaic composition, wasn't unique to Greece. Serbian guslers recited epic poems thousands of lines long using similar mnemonic devices, proving that this was a global strategy for safeguarding complexity without writing. The implications ripple far beyond ancient poetry. If Homer's works could encode accurate descriptions of weapons, geography, and even naval tactics from 3,000 years ago, what other oral traditions might hold comparable secrets? Take the Finnish Kalevala, a 19th-century compilation of oral poetry that preserved pre-Christian myths and metallurgy techniques long after they'd vanished from written records. Or the Tibetan Gesar epic, still recited today, which historians suspect contains veiled accounts of medieval Central Asian conflicts. Even the Bible's Old Testament blends oral and written traditions. Archaeologists have found that the Song of Deborah in Judges chapter 5, one of the oldest biblical passages, preserves syntax and themes, suggesting it originated as an oral victory hymn from the 12th century BC. Yet the real mystery lies in how these traditions resist distortion. When linguists analyzed multiple versions of the Odyssey from different regions, they discovered something remarkable. While regional dialects colored the phrasing, the core events and descriptions remained stable, like a melody played in different keys. This resilience hints at a sophisticated checks and balances system. Communities likely self-corrected deviations, much like the Maori Wakapapa chanters who would interrupt a speaker mid-recitation to correct a mispronounced ancestor's name. Oral traditions weren't free-for-alls, they were tightly governed cultural contracts. the Homeric epics challenge us to rethink what counts as evidence. When Heinrich Schliemann used the Iliad as a literal map to uncover Troy in the 1870s, academics scoffed until his shovel struck the city's walls. Today, researchers apply similar methods to other oral traditions. In the Pacific, Polynesian voyaging chants have led archaeologists to previously unknown island settlements. In Africa, the Man people's oral histories guided scientists to the ruins of the Mali Empire's capital. These successes suggest that dismissing oral accounts as just stories might be our own blind spot, a bias forged in an age obsessed with ink and paper. Perhaps the most humbling lesson comes from comparing Homer to modern memory experiments. Psychologists have found that when people transmit information orally, they don't just degrade it, they unconsciously prioritize and refine it. Useless details fade, while survival-critical knowledge hardens into core narratives. The Iliad's obsessive focus on funeral rites and ship construction wasn't random. These were life-or-death matters for Bronze Age Greeks. In this light, oral traditions aren't flawed history books. They're distilled wisdom, filtered through generations until only the most vital truths remain. So the next time you hear an ancient epic, listen for the quiet truths beneath the poetry. That mythical city might be waiting under a Turkish hillside. That exaggerated hero's feat could mirror a real warrior's armor. The past didn't always write itself down, sometimes it sang. West Africa's griots are more than storytellers. They're human archives, their voices carrying centuries of unbroken history. For over 1,000 years, these master oral historians have preserved genealogies so precise they can trace family lineages back 30 generations, recite the outcomes of wars with battlefield details, and even recount the exact terms of medieval trade agreements, all without a single written note. The secret lies in their rigorous training. A griot's apprenticeship begins in childhood, often under a family elder, where they memorize not just events, but the very rhythm and tone with which each story must be told. A misplaced word or altered inflection isn't just a mistake. It's a breach of sacred duty, because in societies like the Mandinka and Wolof, griots aren't entertainers. They're the legal and moral backbone of their communities. Their methods reveal a sophistication that challenges modern assumptions about oral history. Take the epic of Sundiata Keita, the 13th century founder of the Mali Empire. Griots recite this saga with such consistency across West Africa that when French historian D.T. Nyon transcribed it in the 1960s, scholars were stunned to find its descriptions of geography, political alliances, and even military tactics corroborated by archaeological evidence. How? Because griots don't just repeat stories, they encode them in layers. A single performance might weave together proverbs, songs, and instrumental cues on the kora harp, each element acting as a mnemonic trigger. The melody of a particular tune might signal a shift to historical facts, while a change in rhythm could mark the insertion of moral lessons. This multisensory approach, combining sound, movement, and narrative, ensures that knowledge isn't just remembered, it's experienced. But the griot tradition's real genius lies in its built-in error detection. Unlike written texts which can be altered silently, oral histories are performed publicly. When a griot recounts a genealogy at a wedding or a battle chronicle at a festival, elders from the community listen intently, ready to correct even subtle deviations. It's a living peer review system where accuracy is maintained not by ink but by collective memory. This communal safeguard has proven remarkably durable. In the 1980s, researchers compared griot accounts of the 17th century Cabo Empire with Portuguese colonial records, and found the oral versions often provided richer, more nuanced perspectives. especially when documenting the lives of women and commoners omitted from European documents. What's often overlooked is how griots balance fidelity with adaptability. While core facts remain sacrosanct, skilled griots tailor their delivery to context, emphasizing different aspects of a story depending on whether it's told at a court proceeding, a harvest celebration, or a rite of passage. This flexibility allows traditions to stay relevant across generations without losing their essence. A griot singing about ancient trade routes might subtly update references to reflect modern markets, ensuring the lesson endures even as the world changes. The implications stretch far beyond Africa. In an era where digital storage feels permanent but proves fragile, hard drives fail, formats become obsolete. The griot model offers a provocative alternative. Their system thrives on redundancy. Multiple griots within a community, no overlapping histories, so no single point of failure can erase the past. It's a lesson in resilience that tech innovators are only now rediscovering as cloud storage companies replicate data across servers worldwide. Perhaps the most profound insight comes from how griots define truth. Where Western historians often prioritize detached objectivity, griots embrace emotional truth, the idea that how people remember an event and why it matters to them is as important as cold facts. When a griot recounts a king's reign, they don't just list dates, they channel the pride, sorrow, or defiance felt by those who lived it. This isn't bias, it's dimensionality, a reminder that history isn't just about what happened, but how it shaped the human heart. So the next time we dismiss oral traditions as mere folklore, we might ask ourselves, which system better preserves the spirit of a people, a dusty parchment listing kings and conquests, or a griot song that makes ancestors feel present in the room? The answer isn't written down. It's carried on the wind in a voice that refuses to let the past go silent. Among the towering mesas of the American Southwest, Hopi elders have passed down stories for generations that sound less like folklore and more like historical archives. Their oral traditions describe migrations across the continent, so precise that anthropologists have matched them to pottery fragments and settlement patterns dating back over 1,000 years. One narrative speaks of clans journeying from the south, guided by signs in the stars, details later corroborated by tree ring data showing drought periods that would have forced such movements. But what's truly astonishing isn't just the accuracy of these accounts, it's the layers of knowledge embedded within them. A single Hopi tale about the corn maiden might encode agricultural cycles, weather patterns, and even ethical principles for sustainable harvesting, all wrapped in allegory. This tradition extends far beyond the Hopi. The Navajo's Nightway ceremony, a 9-day chant, weaves together medicinal botany, celestial navigation, and moral philosophy. Each verse acts like a living textbook when singers describe specific plants used in healing. They're preserving pharmacology that modern studies have found effective for everything from inflammation to infection. Meanwhile, along the Pacific Northwest coast, Tlingit and Haida totem poles tell family histories through symbolic carvings, but oral interpreters add crucial context. The curve of a bear's paw might represent a treaty, while the direction of a raven's gaze could signify ancestral trade routes. These aren't just art, they're mnemonic devices for complex legal and ecological knowledge. What sets Native American storytelling apart is its holistic approach. Where Western traditions often separate science from spirituality, indigenous narratives fuse them. The Lakota star knowledge, for instance, blends astronomical observations with creation myths, describing celestial events like the supernova that created the Crab Nebula in 1054, an event modern astronomers confirmed centuries later. Similarly, Cherokee stories about the Little People, often dismissed as mere fairy tales, contain detailed descriptions of cave systems and medicinal springs that match geological surveys. This interplay of myth and fact raises a provocative question. Did these cultures develop a narrative technology more sophisticated than we've realized? The answer may lie in how these stories were structured. Native American oral traditions frequently use repetitive patterns, not unlike the Homeric epithets, but with an added dimension: seasonal reinforcement. Stories were told at specific times of year relevant to their content. Salmon lore during fishing seasons, planting tales in spring. This temporal anchoring created what cognitive scientists call episodic memory cues, tying knowledge to lived experience. A Zuni farmer hearing a story about drought-resistant corn during planting season wasn't just being entertained. They were receiving a survival manual encoded in narrative. Perhaps the most striking evidence of these traditions' reliability comes from environmental science. In 2012, researchers studying forest management in British Columbia found that Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en oral histories of wildfires aligned perfectly with dendrochronology records going back 3 centuries. Even more remarkably, their stories described cool burns, low-intensity fires used to clear underbrush centuries before Western forestry adopted the practice. This wasn't just preserved knowledge, it was a sophisticated land management system maintained through storytelling. Yet these traditions face modern challenges. Language loss, cultural disruption, and the pressures of globalization have strained the delicate chain of transmission. When a fluent Cherokee speaker passes away, it's not just a language lost, it's an entire library of ecological and historical knowledge. Some communities are fighting back by pairing elders with recording technology, creating hybrid oral written archives. Others, like the Blackfeet Nation, have integrated traditional stories into school curricula, ensuring the next generation inherits both the tales and the wisdom they carry. The lesson here transcends anthropology. In an age of climate crisis, Native American storytelling offers more than history. It provides models for sustainability encoded in narrative. When a Hopi elder speaks of Spider Woman teaching humans to weave, they're not just recounting a myth, they're preserving principles of balance and reciprocity that could reshape our relationship with the natural world. These stories remind us that knowledge isn't just about facts, it's about context, about understanding how every thread connects in the web of existence. And that may be the most vital lesson of all. The Norse sagas pulse with a peculiar duality. They're simultaneously sweeping epics of gods and giants and meticulous records of real fjords, farmsteads, and feuds. Take the saga of Eric the Red, which describes the voyage to Vinland in such exacting detail that in the 1960s, archaeologists used it like a treasure map, uncovering the Viking settlement at Elance Orks Meadows in Newfoundland. The saga didn't just mention a distant land, it specified bay formations, seasonal weather patterns, and even the type of wild grapes found there, details so precise they matched the Canadian coastline. This isn't just storytelling, it's navigation by narrative, but the saga's genius lies in their layered structure. On the surface, they're packed with dragons and valkyries, but beneath the mythic veneer, they encode practical knowledge. The saga of the Greenlanders, for instance, recounts failed expeditions with chilling accuracy, starvation, shipwrecks, and alliances gone awry, all while weaving in celestial cues for sailing. When modern historians cross-referenced these accounts with ice core samples, they found matching climate data. The sagas, years of endless winter, aligned with volcanic eruptions that blocked sunlight in the 10th century. It's as if the Vikings embedded their own climate records in the guise of epic poetry. What's often overlooked is how the sagas balanced flexibility with fidelity. Skald's Norse poets weren't rigid reciters, they adapted stories for their audiences, much like Griots or Homeric bards, yet certain elements remained sacrosanct. Genealogies, for example, were recited with near-legal precision because in Viking society, Your ancestry determined land rights and alliances. A single mispronounced name could disrupt inheritance claims, so these sections were hardened against change, while battle descriptions might flourish with artistic license. This wasn't inconsistency, it was a sophisticated prioritization system, ensuring critical facts survived while less vital details could breathe. The sagas also hint at lost technologies. The Völuspá, a Norse poem within the Poetic Edda, describes a sunstone that could locate the sun on cloudy days, long dismissed as fantasy until a 2013 study found calcite crystals in a 16th century shipwreck. These stones, when held to the sky, polarize light, revealing the sun's position even in fog. Suddenly, the saga's cryptic verse about steering by the hidden sun made startling sense. Similar clues pepper the texts, references to Ulfaljots or wolf-light sails that some scholars now believe were early attempts at weather-resistant flax weaving. Yet the saga's greatest challenge is their ambiguity. Unlike the rigid recitations of Vedic hymns, Norse oral tradition thrived on regional variation. Two versions of the same saga might place a battle in different valleys or attribute a quote to conflicting characters. For centuries, historians dismissed these discrepancies as flaws until they realized the variations themselves held data. Like tree rings recording climate shifts, divergent saga versions often reflected local perspectives or political alliances. A Norwegian account might vilify a Danish king, while a Danish retelling painted him as a hero. These weren't errors, they were cultural fingerprints. Modern tools are unlocking deeper layers. Linguists using algorithmic analysis have detected archaic syntax in certain saga passages, phrases so old they predate written Old Norse, suggesting these sections were preserved verbatim for centuries before being recorded. Meanwhile, archaeologists in Iceland recently excavated a 10th century hall described in Egil's saga, finding charred beams exactly where the text claimed a feud ended in arson. The convergence is uncanny, a story about a fiery revenge frozen in both soil and song. So where does this leave us? The sagas defy simple categorization as fact or fiction. They're both a tapestry where every thread of fantasy might conceal a strand of historical truth. When a saga speaks of Ragnarök, the apocalyptic battle, it's not just prophesying doom, it's echoing real volcanic winters that scarred the Norse world. When heroes duel trolls in caves, they might be memorializing conflicts over tin mines or hunting grounds. The past didn't come labeled for our convenience, it arrived wrapped in metaphor, waiting for us to peel back the layers. And that's the real magic of the sagas. They don't just tell us what happened, they tell us how the Vikings remembered and why it mattered enough to sing about. Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime stories shimmer with a depth that goes far beyond myth. They might just be the longest continuous records of human observation on Earth. These narratives, passed down for over 60,000 years, don't just describe how the rainbow serpent shaped rivers or how the ancestors became stars. They encode environmental data with startling precision. Along the northern coast, Yolngu elders sing of a time when the shoreline stretched far beyond their current boundaries, describing bays and headlands that now lie underwater. When geologists mapped these submerged landscapes, they found them matching the song's details almost exactly, memories of a coastline swallowed by rising seas 7,000 years ago. But the real revelation comes from the stories describing creatures that vanished millennia ago. In the Kimberley region, rock art depicts thylacines, Tasmanian tiger-like marsupials alongside human figures, while Dreamtime narratives speak of hunting, powerful dog-like beasts with stiff tails. Paleontologists confirm thylacines once roamed mainland Australia before going extinct there around 3,000 years ago. Even more striking are accounts from the Gunditjmara people, whose tales of the Mihurung Peringmul, giant birds that shook the ground when they walked, align perfectly with fossil evidence of Geniones, a 500-kilogram flightless bird that died out 40,000 years ago. The odds of these details surviving by chance astronomically low. This raises a profound question. Were these stories merely accidental records, or did Aboriginal cultures develop a deliberate system for preserving critical knowledge? The evidence points to intentionality. Dreamtime narratives aren't told haphazardly, they're performed in specific ceremonial contexts, with strict rules governing their transmission. Elders train for decades to master the precise wording, gestures, and even the seasonal timing of each story, creating a multi-sensory framework that resists distortion. The Walpiri people's Kuruwari tradition, for instance, embeds land navigation cues in song cycles so accurately that modern surveyors have used them to locate water sources in the desert. What modern science calls data, Aboriginal cultures wove into the very fabric of storytelling. The Wardaman people's celestial narratives don't just personify stars as ancestors, they track the precession of equinoxes over millennia, a phenomenon confirmed by astronomers. When a Darol elder describes the fire stars predicting the arrival of whales, they're preserving generations of ecological observation, linking celestial events to migration patterns. This isn't mythology, it's a sophisticated knowledge system disguised as lore. The true test lies in practicality. When anthropologists worked with Matu hunters in the Western Desert, they found that traditional stories about firehawks, raptors that spread wildfires to flush out prey, contain detailed instructions for controlled burning. These techniques, once dismissed as primitive, are now recognized by ecologists as vital for maintaining biodiversity. Similarly, Ungarangari weaving patterns, said to be taught by Dreamtime ancestors, incorporate mathematical sequences that optimize basket strength, a blend of artistry and engineering passed down through generations. Perhaps the most humbling insight comes from comparing Dreamtime stories to Western scientific methods. Where modern researchers rely on instruments and journals, Aboriginal cultures developed a holistic model where knowledge is inseparable from culture, land, and spirituality. A single story about the honey ant ancestor might teach water-finding skills, ethical sharing practices, and astronomical markers for seasonal change, all intertwined. This approach didn't just preserve facts, it sustained entire ecosystems for millennia. As climate scientists now turn to indigenous fire management practices to combat wildfires, and marine biologists study Dreamtime sea level stories to understand coastal changes, we're witnessing a paradigm shift. These narratives aren't relics of a bygone era, they're living libraries, offering solutions our fragmented modern systems have overlooked. The Dreamtime didn't just record the past, it might just hold the keys to our future. Translating an oral tradition is like trying to catch smoke with your hands the moment you grasp it. The essence slips through your fingers. Consider the Aboriginal Dreamtime story of the rainbow serpent, a being said to have carved rivers and mountains as it moved across the land. To a Western scholar, this might read as pure mythology, but to an initiated elder, every curve of the serpent's body corresponds to a specific waterhole or geological formation, a literal map encoded in metaphor. When these stories are translated word for word into English, the landscape embedded within them often evaporates, leaving behind only the shell of the narrative. The problem isn't just linguistic, it's cultural. Many oral traditions rely on tonal languages where a single syllable's pitch can change meaning entirely. The Yoruba of Nigeria, for example, use proverbs packed with tonal wordplay to convey legal precedents and moral codes. Translated flatly into a non-tonal language like English, the proverb, O L letter 1 Ebin, ein letter 1 E 6 3 I N letter 1 E C D grav R letter 1 E C D grav. Proverbs are the horses of words, loses its rhythmic cadence along with layers of implied meaning about the weight and mobility of wisdom. Even more challenging are stories built on untranslatable concepts like the Inuit sila, which simultaneously means weather, consciousness, and the life force connecting all things. Pressed into a dictionary definition, sila collapses like a deflated balloon. This isn't just an academic dilemma, it has real consequences for historical accuracy. When 19th century ethnographers recorded Native American oral histories, they often smoothed out repetitions, removed superfluous ceremonial language, and rearranged narratives to fit European literary conventions. The result, stories that felt more familiar to Western readers but were stripped of their mnemonic scaffolding. The Lakota winter counts pictographic calendars marking annual events were traditionally explained through extended oral commentary. Early translators, however, often published only the images with brief captions, severing the vital link between symbol and story. Modern scholars are developing more nuanced approaches. Anthropologist Keith Basso's work with the Western Apache revealed how place names function as moral lessons. A location called Shades of Shit isn't just crude humor, it's a warning about the consequences of laziness, tied to a specific site where ancestors suffered from poor preparation. To translate this as a standalone phrase would miss its entire pedagogical purpose. Similarly, when linguists recorded the Tuvan throat-singing epics of Siberia, they realized the melodies themselves carried meaning, the harmonics mimicking wind patterns critical for nomadic navigation. A text-only translation would lose this acoustic roadmap entirely. Technology offers partial solutions. Some teams now use multimedia archives, pairing written transcripts with audio recordings, video of gestures, and even 3D maps of referenced landscapes. The Digital Himalaya project, for instance, preserves Sherpa oral histories alongside drone footage of the trails and peaks described in the stories. Yet even these efforts grapple with irreducible gaps. The Maori haka isn't just a war dance, it's a vibrational dialogue with ancestors, where the tremor of a foot striking earth carries as much meaning as the shouted words. Can a microphone truly capture that resonance? Perhaps the most profound insight comes from the storytellers themselves. When asked how to translate their traditions, Navajo elders often respond, "You don't, you learn to hear them as we do." This isn't gatekeeping, it's a recognition that some knowledge lives in the space between words, in the pause before a punchline, in the way firelight flickers across a storyteller's face. The challenge isn't to make oral traditions fit our frameworks, it's to expand our frameworks until we can finally listen. Science is beginning to catch up with what indigenous cultures have known for millennia, that oral traditions aren't just stories, but meticulously preserved records of real events. Take the Klamath people of the Pacific Northwest, whose legend of the Battle of Lau and Skell describes a fiery conflict between two spirits atop Mount Mazama. For generations, outsiders dismissed this as folklore, until geologists discovered the tale perfectly matches the volcanic eruption that formed Crater Lake over 7,000 years ago. The Klamath account details the mountain's collapse, the fiery explosions, even the color of the ash plume details corroborated by modern volcanology. This isn't coincidence, it's corroboration. The same pattern emerges globally. In Australia, the Gunditj Mara people's stories of Budgebim's fury, a creation being spewing molten rock, align with volcanic activity in the region that last occurred 37,000 years ago. Even more astonishing, their oral maps of lava flows guided archaeologists to ancient eel traps hidden beneath the hardened terrain. Meanwhile, in the Mediterranean, Plato's account of Atlantis sinking into the sea, long considered pure fiction, now draws scrutiny from oceanographers. Core samples from the Santorini caldera reveal a cataclysmic Bronze Age eruption that devastated Minoan civilization, a disaster that could have inspired the tale. What's revolutionary isn't just the accuracy of these accounts, but their timescale. The oral history of New Zealand's Maori describes the arrival of their ancestors in foggy, smoky skies, a detail that seemed poetic until ice core analysis linked it to the massive eruption of Mount Tarawera in 1316. That's over 5 centuries of unbroken transmission before European contact. Similarly, Navajo stories of fire rocks falling from the sky were validated when geologists located a meteor impact crater in Arizona dated to 25,000 years ago, a time when humans were already thriving in the region. The breakthroughs don't stop at geology. Geneticists working with the Tsimshian people of British Columbia found that their matrilineal oral genealogies matched DNA evidence with 98% accuracy, tracing lineages back over 2,000 years. In the Amazon, Tucano elders' descriptions of rivers that changed course led researchers to prehistoric oxbow lakes invisible under modern rainforest canopy. Even astronomy is affected. When astrophysicists superimposed Aboriginal sky stories onto star maps, they realized the tales encode variable stars and supernova visible only with telescopes, events witnessed and remembered long before Galileo. Yet the most compelling validation comes from disaster preparedness. When the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami struck, the Moken people of Thailand survived because their Laboon oral tradition warned that when waters recede abnormally, one must flee to high ground. Scientists later confirmed this knowledge stemmed from ancestral memories of similar events centuries prior. Similarly, Andean communities still avoid building on floodplains marked in Inca quipus as hazardous zones, a precaution modern hydrology confirms as wise. This seismic shift in understanding raises an urgent question. If oral traditions can preserve millennia of environmental data, what other wisdom have we overlooked by privileging written records? The answer might lie in collaboration. Projects like the Living Lexicon Initiative now pair indigenous storytellers with climatologists, using oral histories to reconstruct pre-colonial weather patterns. The results are humbling, often more nuanced than instrumental records. It's a reminder that truth doesn't always live on parchment. Sometimes it rides the rhythm of a chant, waits in the refrain of a song, or lingers in the spaces between spoken words. The flames that consumed the Library of Alexandria didn't just burn parchment and ink, they incinerated an entire universe of thought. Historians still mourn the loss of scrolls containing works by Archimedes, Euripides, and countless others. Their words turned to ash in an instant. Yet while Alexandria's tragedy symbolizes the vulnerability of written knowledge, it also reveals a paradox. The very fragility of physical records might have blinded us to the enduring power of oral traditions. After all, no conqueror could burn what lived in the breath and bones of people. This resilience isn't hypothetical, it's etched into history. When invaders sacked the great Buddhist university of Nalanda in India in the 12th century, they torched its libraries so thoroughly that the fires reportedly burned for months. But the monks who escaped carried something no army could destroy: the Polycanon, a vast collection of teachings memorized syllable perfect over centuries. Today, those same chants still resonate in monasteries across Sri Lanka and Southeast Asia, their words preserved not on fragile palm leaves but in the unbroken chain of human memory. The lesson is stark. Writing fixes knowledge in place, but oral tradition lets it move like water, flowing around obstacles and finding new paths to survive. Yet oral traditions offer more than just durability, they're adaptive. Consider the fate of the Maya codices. Of the thousands burned by Spanish missionaries, only 4 survive, their intricate glyphs now painstakingly deciphered by scholars. Meanwhile, in remote Guatemalan highlands, Maya elders still recite the Popol Vuh, their creation epic, with details about celestial events and agricultural cycles that match archaeological findings. The difference: the written codices were static targets. The oral tradition evolved, absorbing new influences while protecting its core like a seed adapting to different soils. This adaptability raises a provocative question. Could oral traditions actually preserve certain types of knowledge better than writing? Take medicinal botany. When ethnobotanists compared ancient Greek herbals with living oral traditions in Crete, they found something remarkable. The written texts listed plants and uses, but the oral practitioners added crucial context, seasonal variations, preparation nuances, even contraindications missed in the scrolls. Why? Because writing freezes knowledge at one moment, while oral transmission allows for continuous refinement, with each generation adding its hard-won insights. The real test comes when both systems face catastrophe. After the 1755 Lisbon earthquake destroyed Portugal's archives, historians relied on fishermen's oral ballads to reconstruct lost tidal patterns and coastal landmarks. Similarly, when Timbuktu's libraries were threatened by conflict in 2012, local scholars didn't just hide manuscripts, they convened griots to relearn genealogies and treaties that had begun fading from parchment. In these moments, oral tradition doesn't just supplement writing, it becomes its backup drive. But let's be clear, this isn't a contest. The wisest cultures knew to use both. The Vikings left runestones with proud boasts of their exploits, but their skalds also sang sagas that preserved navigation routes and climate observations. Jain monks in India wrote meticulous scriptures but still maintain an oral tradition called vachana to catch scribble errors. The lesson isn't that one system supersedes the other, but that together they create redundancy, the same principle that now guides our digital cloud storage. Perhaps the most poignant example comes from modern efforts to revive endangered languages. When the last fluent speaker of the Native American Wakchumni language began forgetting words, linguists didn't just consult old notebooks, they recorded her songs, because melody had preserved vocabulary her conscious mind could no longer access. In that moment, the ancient power of oral tradition revealed itself anew. Knowledge doesn't just live in the mind, it lives in the body, in rhythm, in the spaces between words where memory and meaning intertwine. The Library of Humanity was never just a building, it's the living breath of those who carry its stories forward. Secret societies have long thrived in the shadows of history, their whispered rituals and guarded teachings sparking both fascination and suspicion. Among the most enigmatic were the mystery schools of ancient Greece, places like Eleusis, where initiates underwent profound rites of passage promising glimpses of divine truths. For nearly 2,000 years, these ceremonies remained fiercely protected by oath-bound participants, their details so closely held that even today, historians can only speculate about what transpired behind those temple doors. But what if these weren't just spiritual experiences? What if the secrecy served a dual purpose, safeguarding not just sacred truths, but advanced knowledge deemed too dangerous or powerful for the uninitiated? The Eleusinian mysteries offer tantalizing clues. Ancient sources describe initiates drinking a potent brew called kykeon, which some scholars believe contained psychoactive compounds, perhaps even ergot, a fungus with properties similar to modern LSD. Could this ritual have been a form of controlled knowledge transmission, using chemistry to induce visionary states that conveyed complex teachings about consciousness or cosmology? Plato himself, an alleged initiate, hinted at this in his writings, describing the mysteries as revelations that struck like lightning, permanently altering one's understanding of reality. Meanwhile, the Dionysian rites involved ecstatic dances and trance states that modern neuroscience suggests could enhance memory consolidation, ideal for embedding esoteric teachings deep in the mind. Across the Channel, the Druids present an even more intriguing case. Roman accounts describe them as philosopher priests who memorized vast volumes of knowledge: astronomy, law, medicine, over 20 years of training, all without writing a single word. Julius Caesar noted their belief that oral transmission prevented sacred information from falling into vulgar hands. But what kind of knowledge demanded such protection? Celtic artifacts reveal sophisticated metallurgical techniques and a calendar system rivaling Rome's, while Druidic lore reportedly included star maps and healing herbs later validated by science. The Welsh legend of the Cauldron of Ceridwen, which bestowed inspiration and prophecy, might encode early experiments with nootropic plants or auditory entrainment, techniques modern researchers are only now rediscovering. The pattern extends globally. In Egypt, the House of Life trained initiates in medicine, architecture, and astronomy, their techniques so advanced that the Edwin Smith Papyrus, a 4,000-year-old medical text, details surgical procedures with near-modern precision. Yet temple inscriptions warn that certain knowledge could only be transmitted mouth to ear. Similarly, the Hindu Upanishads distinguish between exoteric teachings for the public and esoteric truths reserved for those who'd undergone rigorous mental training. This stratification wasn't merely elitism, it reflected a profound understanding of how information could be weaponized. The Vimana Shastra, a controversial Sanskrit text, describes flying machines and energy weapons in such technical detail that 20th-century engineers attempted reconstructions. Whether myth or manual, its survival through oral lineages suggests someone believed these ideas were worth protecting. The most compelling evidence lies in the outcomes. Mystery school alumni like Pythagoras emerged with geometric theorems and harmonic principles that still underpin modern science. The Freemasons, inheritors of guild secrets from medieval stonemasons, later became conduits for Enlightenment ideas about liberty and reason. Even suppressed traditions resurface unexpectedly. The Rosicrucian manuscripts of the 17th century, claiming to preserve ancient wisdom, sparked advances in chemistry and philosophy despite being dismissed as hoaxes. This cyclical pattern hints at a startling possibility. Perhaps these societies weren't just hiding knowledge, they were curating it, releasing fragments only when the world was ready. Yet the shadows hold as many questions as answers. Without written records, how much was truly lost to time? The Gnostic Gospels, rediscovered at Nag Hammadi in 1945, revealed Christian mystic traditions erased by orthodoxy. How many other teachings vanished when their last initiate died? And in an age of digital oversharing, does the very concept of secret knowledge still hold power? The irony is rich. Today's scientists peer into quantum realms and neural networks, arriving at truths that sound eerily like the old mysteries: unity of consciousness, the illusion of time, the universe as vibration. Maybe the initiates knew all along. Maybe they're still whispering if we know how to listen. Rituals transform memory into muscle, embedding knowledge so deeply that forgetting becomes almost impossible. Take the Hindu tradition of Vedic chanting, where priests recite hymns with such exacting precision that even the slightest deviation in pitch or rhythm is immediately corrected. This isn't just about spiritual devotion, it's a meticulously engineered system for preservation. Each syllable, each pause, each rise and fall of the voice is codified into rituals that have remained virtually unchanged for over 3,000 years. Modern linguists studying these chants found that the phonetics and syntax match ancient Sanskrit texts with near-perfect accuracy, proving that ritualized repetition can freeze language in time. But rituals do more than just repeat, they reinforce. In the Catholic Mass, the liturgy's structured cadence ensures that prayers and scriptures are recited identically across continents and centuries. The Nicene Creed, formulated in the 4th century, is still spoken today word for word in churches worldwide. This isn't blind tradition, it's a fail-safe against distortion. By embedding critical texts in ceremonial contexts where deviation feels sacrilegious, communities create psychological barriers against alteration. The ritual becomes the guardian of the message. The same principle emerges in unexpected places. Japanese no theater, with its highly formalized movements and phrases, preserves medieval dialects and historical narratives that would otherwise have faded. Performers train for decades to replicate every gesture and intonation precisely, not for artistic purity alone, but because the ritual itself is the vessel for cultural memory. Similarly, the Jewish Passover Seder, a ritual meal where the Exodus story is retold, ensures that even children absorb historical and ethical lessons through sensory cues. Bitter herbs symbolizing suffering, matzah representing haste. The ritual doesn't just convey information, it makes the past visceral. What's fascinating is how rituals leverage neurobiology. Studies show that multisensory experiences, like the smell of incense during a Buddhist chant or the tactile rhythm of rosary beads, activate multiple memory centers in the brain simultaneously. The Maori haka, often mistaken as merely a war dance, is actually a mnemonic tapestry. Each stomp corresponds to ancestral footsteps, each shout a historical event, all encoded in kinetic memory. When the body remembers, the mind follows, yet rituals aren't infallible. The Aztecs' intricate calendar ceremonies, once vital for agricultural and astronomical knowledge, fractured under Spanish conquest, leaving gaps modern scholars struggle to fill. Conversely, the Balinese Kekak fire dance, originally a 1930s creation for tourists, shows how rituals can adapt without losing core meaning, blending Hindu epics with traditional trance techniques to preserve spiritual narratives in a changing world. The real question isn't whether rituals preserve knowledge, but why they succeed where plain speech fails. The answer lies in embodiment. A story told is fleeting, but a story performed, with rhythm, repetition, and reverence, becomes part of the collective heartbeat. When Tibetan monks debate philosophy through choreographed claps and gestures, or when West African griots pluck the kora's strings to summon centuries-old genealogies, they're not just recalling the past. They're reliving it, one ritualized motion at a time. Snow White's poisoned apple might seem like pure fantasy, but peel back the layers of the tale, and you'll find something startling, echoes of real botanical knowledge. The vivid description of the apple's crimson sheen, the way it induces a death-like sleep, mirrors the effects of nightshade plants like belladonna, used for centuries in both medicine and ritual. This isn't just a macabre plot device. It's a coded warning about the thin line between healing and harm, preserved in a story simple enough for children to remember. And Snow White isn't alone. Across cultures, folklore bristles with what scientists now recognize as empirical observations disguised as fantasy. Take the werewolf myth, a staple of European folklore. For generations, these tales of humans transforming under the full moon were dismissed as superstition until medical historians linked them to rare conditions like clinical lycanthropy or porphyria, diseases that cause extreme light sensitivity, hair growth, and even delirium. Even the moon's role isn't arbitrary. Porphyria symptoms often worsen with hormonal fluctuations, which some studies suggest may sync with lunar cycles. The curse of the werewolf, then, might have been a way to explain very real suffering, wrapping medical truth in the cloak of myth to ensure it survived. Then there's the global prevalence of dragon legends. From the fire-breathing worms of Europe to the serpentine lung of China, these creatures share uncanny similarities. Paleontologists propose that ancient discoveries of dinosaur fossils, massive bones protruding from eroded cliffs, could have inspired these tales. The Grindilo, a watery demon from English folklore, bears a striking resemblance to the extinct plesiosaur, while the Maori taniwha often lurks in regions where marine reptile fossils are abundant. But dragons aren't just fossil fuel, they're also brilliant examples of early hazard symbolism. Their lairs in caves or deep lakes often correspond to real geological dangers, methane vents, toxic springs, or even volcanic activity. A dragon wasn't just a monster, it was a placeholder for "here be dangers," a proto-scientific warning label. Even nursery rhymes harbor hidden wisdom. Ring Around the Rosie is often linked to the Black Death, with its pocket full of posies referencing herbs carried to ward off plague. While historians debate this specific connection, the broader pattern holds. Folk songs frequently encoded survival knowledge. The Inuit lullaby, Seela's Song, describes wind patterns critical for predicting storms, while West African counting rhymes embed agricultural calendars in their rhythms. These weren't just child's play, they were mnemonic lifelines, ensuring vital information stayed accessible even to the youngest members of a community. The genius of folklore lies in its duality. By embedding facts in fantastical narratives, our ancestors ensured they'd be retold across generations. The Japanese legend of the Bakugera, a ghostly whale skeleton that brings misfortune, likely stems from observations of tsunami debris, where beached whale bones signaled past disasters. Slavic tales of firebirds mirror the behavior of bioluminescent owls, their glowing feathers explained through myth. Even the banshee's wail, that eerie harbinger of death in Irish lore, aligns with the vocalizations of barn owls, often heard before storms or in times of famine. So were these stories primitive science or sophisticated allegory? The answer is both. Folklore didn't just record observations, it contextualized them, turning isolated facts into cohesive cultural lessons. When a Cherokee story describes the origin of strawberries as a trail of glowing hearts to mend a broken relationship, it's not just botany, it's a lesson in reconciliation, with the fruit's vivid color and sweetness reinforcing the message. This blending of fact and philosophy made the knowledge sticky, resistant to the erosion of time. The implications are profound. If fairy tales are fossilized science, then dismissing them as mere fiction means overlooking a treasure trove of ancestral insight. Modern researchers are beginning to mine these narratives for clues. Ethnobotanists study witch-trial testimonies to rediscover herbal remedies, while climatologists analyze flood myths to reconstruct ancient weather patterns. The past didn't write textbooks, it told stories, and somewhere between the dragons and the poisoned apples, our ancestors left us a map, not just to their world, but to the enduring power of human curiosity. The whispers of the past grow fainter with each passing generation, not from lack of interest, but from the relentless tide of globalization. In remote villages where elders once held entire cosmologies in their minds, satellite dishes now beam in new narratives, and the old stories risk fading like ink left in the sun. Consider the Tuvan throat singers of Siberia, whose melodies once mapped the migration patterns of reindeer herds across the steppe. With fewer young apprentices learning these songs, centuries of ecological knowledge, when to move herds to avoid overgrazing, how to predict storms from subtle shifts in wind harmonics, could vanish within decades. This isn't just about losing folklore, it's about dismantling intricate systems of survival honed over millennia. The scale of loss is staggering. Linguists estimate a language disappears every 2 weeks, and with it, entire libraries of unwritten wisdom. The last fluent speaker of the Native American Wakchumni language, Marie Wilcox, spent years painstakingly creating a dictionary to preserve her tongue, knowing its extinction would erase not just words, but a unique way of perceiving time, space, and kinship. Similarly, when a Shipibo healer in the Amazon dies without passing on their Ikaro's sacred healing songs, an entire pharmacopoeia of plant knowledge may vanish, as these melodies encode precise recipes for medicinal brews. The irony is cruel. In an age where we can store terabytes of data in the cloud, we're failing to save the most irreplaceable hard drives, human minds. Yet hope isn't lost. Innovative projects worldwide are bridging ancient and modern to document these traditions before they're silenced. In Australia, the Living Archive of Aboriginal Languages digitizes endangered songlines, pairing recordings with 3D maps to preserve their geographical context. The Enduring Voices project collaborates with elders to create talking dictionaries, capturing not just vocabulary, but the cadence and emotion behind words. Even AI is joining the effort. Researchers at the University of Helsinki trained algorithms to analyze Sami yoiks, identifying patterns that might help reconstruct lost melodies. But technology alone isn't enough. The real breakthroughs come when communities lead the process. The Maori in New Zealand have established language nests, immersive preschools where children absorb ancestral knowledge through play, ensuring traditions don't just survive in archives but thrive in living culture. The urgency extends beyond sentimentality. Indigenous oral traditions hold solutions to modern crises. When anthropologists worked with Inuit hunters to document their oral sea ice maps, they uncovered climate adaptation strategies far more nuanced than satellite data knowledge, now guiding Arctic rescue teams. In Kenya, Maasai pastoralists' drought predictions, passed down through generations of poetry, have proven startlingly accurate compared to meteorological models. These aren't relics, they're vital tools, yet the clock ticks louder each year. The last generation of elders who remember pre-industrial lifeways are in their twilight, and with them slips away humanity's oldest operating system, not coded in binary, but in story, song, and shared memory. What's at stake isn't just preserving the past, but safeguarding humanity's collective future. Oral traditions are more than historical curiosities. They're time-tested frameworks for resilience, encoded in forms that have weathered centuries of upheaval. The choice before us isn't whether to document, but how, with the humility to listen, the creativity to bridge worlds, and the awareness that some knowledge once gone can never be recovered. The songs are still being sung for now. The question is whether we'll learn to hear them before the last voices fall silent. From the terraced rice paddies of the Ifugao in the Philippines to the drought-resistant millet fields of India's tribal communities, indigenous agricultural practices preserved through oral traditions are proving to be more than relics of the past. They're blueprints for a sustainable future. These time-tested techniques, refined over centuries and encoded in songs, stories, and rituals, are now catching the attention of scientists grappling with modern crises like soil degradation and water scarcity. Take the Three Sisters method, a planting system passed down through generations of Native American oral tradition. By growing corn, beans, and squash together, these crops form a symbiotic relationship. The corn provides structure for the beans to climb, the beans fix nitrogen in the soil, and the squash leaves shade the ground to retain moisture. Modern agronomists have confirmed this trio outperforms monoculture planting in both yield and resilience, offering a viable alternative to chemical-dependent farming. The same wisdom extends to water management. In Peru's Andes, Quechua communities still follow ancient oral protocols for maintaining coches, networks of small reservoirs that capture glacial meltwater. These systems, described in agricultural chants and woven into textile patterns, are so efficient that engineers are now adapting them to combat water shortages in arid regions. Similarly, Australian Aboriginal fire stick farming, a practice of controlled burns passed down through Dreamtime stories, is being revived to prevent catastrophic wildfires. Traditional fire regimes, carefully timed to ecosystem cues sung in seasonal songs, once maintained biodiversity for millennia. Today, national parks from California to the Amazon are integrating these oral-based techniques, with satellite data showing they reduce greenhouse gas emissions by up to 40% compared to conventional firefighting methods. But it's not just landscapes benefiting from this revived knowledge. Human health is too. Ethnobotanists racing to document disappearing oral traditions have uncovered herbal remedies with startling efficacy. The Kalahari San's use of devil's claw for inflammation, preserved in hunting stories, has inspired FDA-approved arthritis treatments. In the Amazon, Shipibo healers Icaro's sacred melodies encoding plant combinations have led researchers to novel antiviral compounds. Even Western medicine's reliance on willow bark for aspirin traces back to Hippocrates recording oral knowledge from Egyptian and Sumerian healers. The pattern is clear. When we listen to these living libraries, we don't just preserve culture, we unlock scientific breakthroughs. The most profound applications may lie in climate adaptation. Inuit elders' oral sea ice maps, with terms distinguishing 80 distinct ice conditions, are helping glaciologists predict Arctic melt patterns more accurately than satellite models alone. Pacific Islanders' wave navigation chants contain data on historical tsunami events that's refining early warning systems. And in Africa, Maasai pastoralists' drought predictions, embedded in generations of poetry, have outperformed meteorological forecasts during recent famines. These aren't anecdotes, they're validated knowledge systems, honed through millennia of observational rigor and preserved through meticulous oral transmission. Yet integrating this wisdom faces hurdles. Modern legal systems often dismiss oral knowledge as anecdotal, unless corroborated by Western science, creating a paradox where traditions must prove their validity to the very institutions that failed to document them. Intellectual property battles loom too, as corporations patent compounds discovered through indigenous guidance without equitable compensation. The key may lie in hybrid approaches like Kenya's Barefoot Meteorologists program, where Maasai elders collaborate with climate scientists to blend traditional indicators with satellite data, resulting in forecasts 20% more accurate than either system alone. Perhaps the greatest lesson isn't just in the techniques themselves, but in the worldview they represent. Oral traditions don't isolate agriculture from astronomy or medicine from mythology. They weave them into a holistic understanding absent from our specialized modern frameworks. When a Hopi farmer plants by moon phases described in creation stories, or a Mongolian herder predicts storms through throat-sung harmonics, they're accessing a unified knowledge model our fragmented sciences are only beginning to reconstruct. In an era of climate crises and ecosystem collapse, these traditions offer more than solutions. They provide a roadmap for reconnecting human knowledge with the living world it describes. The choice isn't between ancient and modern, but between recognizing wisdom wherever it speaks, even if its voice carries the cadence of a chant rather than the authority of a peer-reviewed journal. Digital technology is reshaping how we preserve the world's vanishing oral traditions, not just by recording voices, but by unlocking hidden layers of meaning. In the Brazilian Amazon, researchers armed with waterproof microphones and AI-powered language models are documenting the last speakers of Tupari, a language with no written form. These recordings aren't just archives, they're being fed into algorithms that detect subtle patterns in storytelling rhythm, revealing how ecological knowledge about medicinal plants is embedded in narrative structure. Meanwhile, in Norway, the Sami people are using 3D spatial audio to capture Joik's traditional songs that map Arctic landscapes, allowing listeners to experience the echoes of valleys and fjords exactly as generations of reindeer herders intended. This isn't mere digitization, it's resurrection. The real breakthrough lies in machine learning's ability to decode what human ears might miss. At the University of California, linguists trained an AI on thousands of hours of Aboriginal Australian songlines. The system identified recurring acoustic motifs that corresponded to specific geographical features, proof that these melodies function as precise oral maps. Similarly, in Ghana, researchers discovered that the tonal shifts in Anansi spider tails encode mathematical concepts, something elders had hinted at for generations but lacked the tools to demonstrate. These technologies are doing more than preserving stories. They're validating entire knowledge systems that academia once dismissed as myth. Yet the digital frontier isn't without risks. When the Himba of Namibia allowed their creation stories to be recorded for a well-intentioned preservation project, they never anticipated those files would later be copyrighted by a foreign university. Now, algorithms can generate synthetic versions of extinct languages like Livonian or Dalmatian, but who decides how these digital ghosts are used? Indigenous groups from Canada to New Zealand are responding with innovative solutions. The Maori have developed blockchain protocols to tag digital taonga treasures with cultural permissions, ensuring oral traditions can't be exploited without tribal consent. Perhaps the most surprising development is how ancient mnemonic techniques are inspiring modern data storage. Scientists at Harvard have encoded DNA with Lakota winter counts pictographic histories traditionally recited aloud, creating biological hard drives that could last millennia. In Switzerland, engineers studying West African drum languages developed error-correcting algorithms for noisy networks, proving that oral traditions' redundancy systems outperform some digital protocols. The irony is profound. The very societies pressured to abandon primitive oral practices are now providing blueprints for cutting-edge tech. The challenge ahead isn't technical, it's ethical. Can we ensure these digital lifelines strengthen living traditions rather than turning them into museum exhibits? Projects like the Living Tongues Institute offer hope, pairing elders with VR tools to create immersive language nests where grandchildren can converse with ancestors' AI avatars. Other initiatives, like Ethiopia's crowdsourced oral literature archive, empower communities to upload and annotate stories directly, blending Wikipedia's model with millennia-old storytelling customs. The goal isn't to freeze oral traditions in digital amber, but to give them new ways to evolve, because knowledge doesn't truly live until it's spoken anew. Skepticism about the reliability of oral traditions isn't just academic nitpicking, it's rooted in some legitimate concerns. After all, we've all played the childhood game of telephone, where a whispered phrase morphs into something unrecognizable by the end of the line. Scale that up over centuries, and the potential for distortion seems overwhelming. Critics point to documented cases where oral histories have shifted dramatically within just a few generations. Take the legend of King Arthur. Medieval Welsh bards described him as a fierce warlord battling Saxon invaders, but by the time French romancers got hold of the story, he'd acquired knights, a round table, and a wizard. Without written records to anchor these tales, how can we trust that any core truth remains? The malleability of memory itself fuels this skepticism. Cognitive psychologists have shown that human recall isn't like retrieving a file from a hard drive. It's an active reconstruction, shaped by present biases and cultural frameworks. When anthropologists recorded multiple versions of the same Indigenous Australian songline in the 1970s, they found variations in place names and events, raising questions about which account, if any, reflected the original. Even well-intentioned storytellers unconsciously reshape narratives to fit contemporary values, a phenomenon historians call presentism. This isn't deceit, it's how human brains naturally operate. Then there's the problem of verification. For oral traditions describing events beyond written history, like the Aboriginal accounts of extinct megafauna, skeptics argue we're left with a circular logic. The stories are validated by geological evidence that was itself discovered because of the stories. Without independent corroboration, how do we distinguish genuine preservation from lucky guesses or later embellishments? The Viking sagas, for instance, correctly describe Norse settlements in North America, but they also depict sea monsters and sorcery. Where do we draw the line between fact and folklore? Some of the sharpest criticism comes from scholars who have witnessed oral traditions being actively manipulated. In the Pacific Islands, colonial-era genealogies were sometimes altered to legitimize land claims, while in Africa, Griot families occasionally tailored histories to flatter wealthy patrons. These aren't theoretical risks, they're documented cases where oral systems failed as preservation mechanisms. When power dynamics influence storytelling, the argument goes, oral traditions become less like time capsules and more like political tools. Yet these critiques often overlook the sophisticated error-checking mechanisms many cultures developed. The Vedic tradition's insistence on phonetic precision, the Maori Wakapapa's interlocking recitations, the West African Griot's tonal mnemonics. These weren't naive attempts at preservation, but deliberate systems engineered to resist distortion. Modern studies of Serbian epic poets show that while surface details might shift between performances, the structural bones of the narrative, key events, relationships, and locations remain remarkably stable over time. This suggests oral traditions aren't passive vessels but active filters, designed to preserve what matters most while allowing peripheral details to adapt. The truth likely lies somewhere between blind faith and outright dismissal. Oral traditions aren't infallible, but neither are written records. Medieval scribes made copying errors, ancient chroniclers exaggerated to please rulers, and modern archives suffer from selective preservation. What makes oral systems unique isn't perfect accuracy, but their ability to encode knowledge in forms that resonate across generations. A legal contract written on parchment may state the terms of a treaty, but a griot's song about that same event carries the emotional weight of broken promises or hard one-piece context that often proves just as crucial for understanding the past. Perhaps the fairest assessment comes from African historian Jan van Sina, who spent decades studying oral traditions before concluding they're neither pure history nor pure fiction, but something in between. They are messages from the past, but like all messages, they've been handled many times along the way. The real question isn't whether oral traditions change, it's whether they change in ways that erase essential truths. And increasingly, evidence suggests that when knowledge is embedded in the right structures, rhythmic, ritualized, and communally verified, it can endure not just as story, but as something startlingly close to history. The Maya civilization presents one of history's most fascinating case studies in knowledge preservation, a society that seamlessly bridged the gap between oral and written traditions without sacrificing the richness of either. While their hieroglyphic script, carved into towering stelae and painted on bark paper codices, captures the imagination, it's their ability to maintain continuity between spoken and inscribed knowledge that holds lessons for us today. Scribes, known as Aj-Tizib, weren't just record keepers. They were trained in the oral performances of royal genealogies and creation myths before committing them to stone. This dual fluency ensured that even when Spanish conquistadors burned most of the written records, the core narratives survived in the spoken rituals of Maya communities, hidden in plain sight. What made this transition so effective? The Maya didn't treat writing as a replacement for oral tradition, but as its complement. Their glyphs often served as prompts for elaborate recitations, much like musical notation guides a performance rather than containing it entirely. A single inscription might reference a myth known fully only to initiates, preserving the story's essence while leaving its full depth to oral transmission. Modern linguists discovered this interplay when comparing ancient glyphs with contemporary Maya oral traditions. In the highlands of Guatemala, elders reciting the Popol Vuh, the Kayich Maya creation, epic used phrases that matched fragments of classic-era inscriptions, proving that key narratives had survived centuries of upheaval. The written word anchored the oral, and the oral breathed life into the written. This synergy offers a blueprint for preserving endangered oral traditions today. Projects like the Maya Hieroglyphic Database Project now collaborate with indigenous speakers to decode inscriptions, not just as historical artifacts, but as living keys to unlock oral knowledge still held by elders. Similarly, the Inuit in Canada are merging ancient storytelling with digital mapping, embedding oral histories of ice conditions into interactive platforms used by climate scientists. These efforts recognize that writing alone can't capture the full spectrum of oral knowledge, the cadence of a chant, the gesture accompanying a proverb, the seasonal context of a harvest song. Yet challenges remain. When the Mixtec of Oaxaca began transcribing their oral histories in the 16th century, Spanish friars imposed Latin alphabets that flattened tonal nuances critical to meaning. Modern initiatives avoid this pitfall by using multimedia, recording storytellers in situ, annotating videos with linguistic analysis, and even creating augmented reality apps where glyphs speak through the voices of tradition bearers. The goal isn't to fossilize oral traditions in text, but to create bridges that let them continue evolving. The Maya example also reveals a counterintuitive truth. Sometimes writing can safeguard orality. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving pre-Columbian Maya books, contains astronomical tables so precise they've been used to predict eclipses centuries later. But without the oral explanations of how to interpret these tables passed down secretly by Maya priests, the data would remain inert. Today, similar partnerships are emerging. In Mali, Griots now work with archivists to digitize their recitations, pairing transcripts with audio recordings to preserve both the content and the performative artistry. The lesson here isn't just about preservation, it's about reciprocity. Oral and written traditions aren't competitors, they're collaborators. The Maya's success lay in recognizing that writing could anchor memory while orality kept it vital. As we race to document disappearing languages and stories, their model reminds us that the real magic happens not in choosing between speech and script, but in weaving them together into a tapestry resilient enough to span millennia. The study of oral traditions presents a profound ethical tightrope walk, one where academic curiosity must harmonize with cultural guardianship. At the heart of this dilemma lies a painful historical pattern. For centuries, researchers have extracted indigenous knowledge like raw minerals, stripping it from its cultural context to serve Western academia, often without consent or compensation. The Hopi tribe's prophecies, meticulously preserved through generations, were published in anthropology journals without tribal approval. The San people's medicinal plant lore, passed down in healing songs, became the basis for patented pharmaceuticals that earned corporations millions while the original knowledge keepers received nothing. These aren't isolated cases, they're symptoms of a system that has treated oral traditions as open-source data rather than sovereign intellectual property. Yet the urgency to document these vanishing traditions creates a moral paradox. When linguist Douglas Parks worked with the last fluent speaker of the Arikara language in the 1970s, he faced a wrenching choice: press forward with recordings the elder initially resisted, or risk losing the language forever. The elder eventually consented, but the episode underscores the fragility of these moments. Who holds the right to decide when preservation outweighs privacy? Some communities, like the Maori, have established clear protocols. Researchers must partner with local Kaishiaki guardians, and any recordings remain under tribal control. Other groups, like the Dani of New Guinea, outright refuse documentation of sacred chants, viewing their power as inseparable from secrecy. The challenge isn't just logistical, it's philosophical. Can knowledge truly be preserved if divorced from the living culture that gives it meaning? The rise of participatory research models offers a path forward. In Canada's Inuit Nunangat, scientists studying traditional ice knowledge now co-author papers with elders, ensuring terminology and context remain intact. The Zuni Pueblo's collaboration with archaeologists blends oral histories with ground-penetrating radar to locate ancestral sites, with tribal members controlling which findings are published. These approaches recognize that oral traditions aren't merely data, they're relationships woven into kinship systems and land stewardship. When the Yanyuwa people of Australia allowed their sea country songs to be filmed, they insisted the footage include the tears of elders singing about drowned ancestral lands. The emotional weight, they argued, was as critical as the geographical details, a dimension no transcript could capture. Technology further complicates the ethics. Voice recognition algorithms can now transcribe endangered languages faster than linguists, but who owns those datasets? Blockchain projects propose tagging digital recordings with traditional knowledge licenses, yet many elders distrust systems they can't physically hold. The Kogi of Colombia, who famously warned anthropologists not to share their prophecies with the younger brother, industrialized society, now face drone footage of their sacred sites circulating online. Even well-intentioned efforts can backfire when a university archived Cherokee stories with open access. Tribal members discovered sacred narratives being used in gaming apps without context. The solution may lie in redefining what preservation means. For the Wampanoag, reviving their language didn't require old recordings. It demanded reconnecting words to their original purpose: clam digging, birch bark canoe building, and Thanksgiving ceremonies. Similarly, the Same's yoik singing tradition thrives not in archives, but in protest songs against Arctic oil drilling, proving oral traditions stay vital when they serve contemporary struggles. Perhaps the ultimate ethical standard isn't just about safeguarding knowledge, but empowering communities to control its journey, whether that means sharing selectively, adapting creatively, or, when chosen, letting some truths remain whispered only among those ordained to carry them. After all, not all wisdom is meant for every ear. Some songs must still be earned. The echoes of our ancestors aren't just whispers in the wind. They're living libraries, their stories etched not in clay or parchment, but in the rhythms of language, the cadence of chants, the very pulse of human memory. From the Aboriginal songlines mapping Ice Age coastlines to the Vedic hymns preserving astronomical observations with mathematical precision, oral traditions have proven themselves not as crude substitutes for writing, but as sophisticated technologies of preservation in their own right. They challenge our modern bias that equates progress with the written word, revealing instead how cultures across millennia engineered knowledge to survive empires, migrations, and even the collapse of civilizations. What makes these traditions so extraordinary is their dual nature: part time capsule, part living organism. Unlike a static clay tablet, an oral narrative adapts as it's retold, refining itself like a river smoothing stones. The Klamath people's volcanic legends didn't just record the eruption of Mount Mazama 7,000 years ago. They encoded warnings about geothermal dangers still relevant today. The Inuit's ice terminology, passed down through throat songs, evolves with each generation to describe new Arctic realities shaped by climate change. This isn't distortion, it's dynamism, proof that the most resilient knowledge systems aren't frozen but fluid. Yet for all their strengths, oral traditions face a modern crisis. A language disappears every 2 weeks, taking with it irreplaceable wisdom about medicinal plants, ecological balance, and celestial navigation. Projects like the Living Tongues Institute are racing to document these voices, but preservation isn't just about recording, it's about respect. The Maori's language nests, where children learn through immersion, or the Cherokee's bilingual signage initiatives show how revival can thrive when communities lead the process. The goal isn't to museumize oral knowledge, but to reintegrate it into the bloodstream of culture. The implications stretch far beyond academia, as climatologists consult Inuit elders to interpret shifting ice patterns, and pharmacologists mine Amazonian chants for new plant compounds. We're witnessing a paradigm shift. These traditions aren't just historical curiosities, they're toolkits for navigating an uncertain future. The Dogon's serious star lore, the Navajo's drought-resistant farming chants, the Polynesian wave navigation songs, all remind us that some truths are too vital to be left solely to parchment. They must be lived, performed, and felt, so the next time you hear an old folktale or ancestral song, listen closely. That myth about the dragon might hold clues to a forgotten fossil bed. That grandmother's recipe chant could encode the secret to drought-resistant crops. The past isn't finished speaking, it's been waiting for us to relearn how to hear. And if we're wise enough to listen, the stories we save might just save us in return. Now it's your turn. Have you encountered an oral tradition that changed how you see history? Share your discoveries below and join us as we keep unraveling humanity's greatest mysteries, one story